The US and South Korean militaries have together launched 8 ballistic missiles into the sea on Monday, a response to North Korean launches a day earlier. It's the second time in recent months that the US and its ally South Korea have jointly responded to similar moves from North Korea. Many see it as representing a hardening of Seoul's approach to Pyongyang.
A fiery early morning display that took all of 10 minutes. Its effects were meant to extend well into the future. The launches of 7 South Korean missiles and 1 American missile in a live-fire exercise, a tit-for-tat reply to North Korea's launching of 8 missiles a day earlier. The response came as South Korea and its hawkish new president marked Memorial Day commemorations. Yoon Suk-yeol saying more than ever, global powers must work to contain North Korea.
North Korea's nuclear and missile threats are getting sophisticated. It fired various ballistic missiles yesterday. Its programs are reaching the level that threaten not only the peace of the Korean peninsula, but also Northeast Asia and the world.
The world has almost grown accustomed to seeing this type of weapons demonstration from North Korea. Indeed, in 2022 alone, North Korea has launched 18 rounds of missile tests, including intercontinental ballistic missiles. Military intelligence suggests President Kim Jong-un is pushing for North Korea's first nuclear test in nearly 5 years.
North Korea has repeatedly launched ballistic missiles, including new ICBMs, at a high frequency since the beginning of this year. A series of North Korean actions threaten the peace and stability of the region and the international community. They cannot be tolerated.
The North's previous launches were last month as U.S. President Joe Biden wrapped up a trip to South Korea and Japan, when Biden reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to defending both allies, and Kim reaffirmed his desire for North Korea to become a nuclear power.
And joining me now for more from Seoul is Reuters senior correspondent Josh Smith. Josh, joint US and South Korean missile launches in response to North Korea. Does this somehow symbolize the new South Korean policy towards its northern neighbor?
It is certainly a return in some ways to a new old policy, one that we last saw in significant levels back in 2017 during the days of the fire and fury threats between Kim Jong-un and former U.S. President Donald Trump. This is not the first time they've done these joint drills this year. They also rolled out joint missile drills late last month when North Korea tested an ICBM the day after U.S. President Joe Biden left the region after his first talks in the region. But as you mentioned, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has promised to make this more of a regular occurrence in response to North Korean missile launches. And given that North Korea appears intent on increasing the number of missiles that it tests, I think it's a fair bet to say that we'll see more of these from the United States and South Korea as well.
Talk to us a bit about those North Korean missile launches. Should they be viewed as missile tests or a sign of diplomacy, North Korea style?
So there are certainly multiple reasons why North Korea would test missiles, including domestic messaging, as well as basically, just developing the military technology that it wants. At the same time, there is undeniably a geopolitical message beyond that. The timing of these latest missiles, for example, came right after South Korea and the United States held the first joint naval drill involving an American aircraft carrier in a number of years. And so it's hard to see that as entirely a coincidence. At the same time, North Korea has been battling what it says is its first COVID outbreak. And something that's interesting that's happened during that time is that they've stopped publicizing or releasing any photos of their missile tests. So we're basically solely dependent on what countries like South Korea and Japan report. So unlike some of their other tests earlier this year, these latest tests We don't know a lot of details. We don't know exactly what they fired, although they do appear to be short-range missiles, so not its biggest missiles, which some analysts say would suggest perhaps a military drill practicing rather than developing some kind of new technology.
I did want to talk to you about North Korea's COVID outbreak. I mean, given that they've admitted that they have an outbreak, it also appears to be that they don't have enough vaccinations, or any vaccinations for that matter, or enough medical supplies to cope with this. Yet we are seeing these missile launches. I mean, what does that say about the country's priorities?
That is a big question, and one that, for example, Washington has not been hesitant to point out, saying that, if sanctions were really causing so many problems, why do they have the resources to conduct these tests? At the same time, I mean, North Korea has said that these tests are its self-defense and basically a matter of life and death for the country itself. And that's the case that they've made to domestic audiences before. At the same time, as mentioned, they haven't been publicizing this, including to folks at home. And analysts have said that may point to them being a bit worried about the imagery of them continuing to shoot these off while not having the resources necessarily to battle the COVID outbreak.
And in the midst of all this, there are also reports that the North is preparing for its first nuclear test since September 2017. What are you hearing in Seoul?
So the last we heard was late last month from South Korean officials who went beyond kind of what we'd seen in satellite imagery of them preparing some of the underground tunnels that they'd previously used for the tests, to say that they had actually, that North Korea had actually begun testing components of a nuclear weapon, detonators and other things, which suggested that it was basically any day now that we might see a new test. Basically, what officials here and analysts have said is that, by all accounts and from everything that they can tell, all of the technical progress has been made toward resuming tests. It basically all just comes down to when Kim Jong-un decides to conduct a new test or not.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you so much for joining us from Seoul, Josh Smith.